Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Quarantine Book Review. I'm your host, Eowyn Elfstone, and today I'll be reviewing The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron, a book not only packed with high fantasy adventure, but also interspersed with intriguing lore and more than a touch of introspection. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we delve into this literary work of art that I personally give a 5-star rating. Before we get too involved in the intricacies of the book itself, let me give you a brief introduction to the author. In case you're wondering, no, I don't have T.A. Barron here on the show with me, although he does also live in Colorado, which is quite a coincidence. He was born here in the wonderful Rocky Mountain region, and growing up had a fascination with writing and literature. However, he ended up going to Harvard and Oxford to study law. He became very successful, but realized after a while that writing is what he really wanted to do. So he quit his job and returned to Colorado to become an author. The Lost Years of Merlin is not his first book, but it is now one of over 30, many of which have earned awards or other critical acclamations. I'm not exactly sure what inspired him to write so much about Merlin in particular, but his fascination with nature is apparent in his book, as I will discuss later on in the episode. So now that you know a bit about the person behind the novel, we can move on to the book itself. As you probably gathered from the title, The Lost Years of Merlin follows the legendary wizard Merlin, although before he became a legendary wizard. In this tale, Merlin is actually a young boy by the name of Emrys, although he doesn't really believe that that is his real name. He was washed up on the shore of ancient Wales, along with a woman named Bronwen, who claims to be his mother, although he doesn't really believe this either. Emrys doesn't remember anything about his life before he washed up in Wales, and eventually he sets out on a quest across the sea to discover more about his true self. He ends up discovering the mythical island of Finkyra, and has many adventures there that he didn't really bargain for. However, I can't tell you about those, because that would defeat the point of reading the book. The Lost Years of Merlin is written at a lower reading level than I first expected when I picked it up. It's listed as a level of 3rd to 8th grade with an interest level of 4th to 8th. However, as I am older than that, I would personally argue that The Lost Years of Merlin could be enjoyed by anyone no matter their age. It is pretty concise, with only 270 pages, and it's separated into 39 short chapters averaging in the 6 to 10 page range. This makes it really nice for short spurts of reading, and it would make it manageable for a younger reader who perhaps is not accustomed to reading full-length novels very often. The simplicity of the book itself, however, does not take away from its magic, which is why $6 to $8 for a paperback copy of the book is, in my opinion, a great deal. Welcome to Character Corner, where we get to know the characters a little better. At least, if the author did a good job writing them. In the case of The Lost Years of Merlin, T.A. Barron has done a wonderful job making not only the protagonist, but all the supporting characters, villains, and even monsters as realistic and relatable as possible. I must warn you that the following content may spoil minor parts of the book, so if you want to read it with no foreknowledge of the plot, you should probably come back to listening to this once you're done reading. However, nothing I am going to reveal will, in my opinion, ruin the experience of reading the book. Emrys does not have an easy childhood by a long shot. In only the first few chapters, he is beaten up by other children, discovers he has some strange magical powers that could probably kill him if he isn't careful, and has his mother figure almost burned for witchcraft, which actually sets the whole town square on fire, causing Emrys to burn his eyes so badly he is permanently blinded. He then spends about a month trying to heal in an abbey in another town, before realizing he has the second sight, which is basically like normal sight, except he can only see during the day, and he's practically colorblind. On top of all this, Bronwyn refuses to tell him anything about his past or his identity. He eventually becomes fed up with his life, and leaving everything behind, he builds a raft and floats out to sea to discover more about himself. Obviously, Emrys is not an ordinary 12-year-old, but the wonder of T.A. Barron's writing is that despite that, he is still just as relatable as any real person. He lacks confidence and is even self-conscious about his appearance. Even after all the trauma he faces, there are still things that make him happy. He loves to hear stories and to spend time in nature. He's even just as sarcastic and cynical as any teenager I know. When he talks to Bronwyn and pleads for her to tell him more about himself, as a reader I can feel his frustration and sadness as much as he does. And above all, Emrys is not a superhero. He doesn't even use his powers because he's so afraid of what might happen if something goes wrong. Sure, he goes on a quest and ends up doing great things, but at the end of the day he only does it because he knows it's the right thing to do. He doesn't believe in himself all that much, and he doesn't think he will ever be anything special, but he knows that he can do his best despite what gets in his way. All he wants is to find somewhere that he belongs, which is what anyone his age hopes for in our world today. Emrys isn't the only character in the book, and while the first-person perspective really gets the readers inside his head more than the other characters are just as well-rounded. Early on in his journey, Emrys meets a strange girl by the name of Rhea, whose love for the forest she lives in, the Druma Wood, outweighs all of her other cares. She takes joy in the small, simple things, and she appreciates the people around her and what they do for her. Unlike Emrys, she is confident that she can make a difference, and she is incredibly determined to save the Druma when it becomes threatened. Rhea may dream big, but she is also young and reckless, and also easily offended. Her energy is so off the charts that it seems to leak out of the pages and into the reader's soul. Her courage and sense of duty is so powerful that it even makes Emrys seem like a horrible person when he refuses to help her save the Druma. Along the way, Emrys also meets a giant named Shim, who's actually really tiny. He follows Rhea and Emrys around, joining in on their quest even though it seems like he doesn't have much to offer. Shim wishes that he was big like other giants, and he feels useless and worthless because of his size. While he is usually pretty high-spirited and always making the readers laugh, one cannot help but feel his pain. There is a part within all of us that wishes we were different in some way, and Shim brings this out. I could go on all day about how realistic all of the characters are, but I'll leave the rest for you to find out for yourself. As much as one could argue that character is everything when it comes to a good fantasy novel, there are many aspects of T.A. Barron's writing that allow his story to come to life. All of his characters have distinct speaking styles that bring out their respective personalities. Shim is a great example of this. He always speaks with improper grammar, which indicates an accent and/or a lack of education. This not only defines him as an individual, but highlights racial differences in the story, a topic that is addressed insightfully in the book, however briefly. As for the other characters, Emrys always has a hint of sarcasm in his voice, and Rhea's is always full of passion and excitement. The dialogue flows like normal conversation, which makes readers feel as though they themselves were standing there listening to them speak. The pacing of the writing itself is also really important to mention about this book. While the description of various settings is always fantastic, and never feels like it's too long. The story is fairly fast-paced, allowing for a quick but satisfying read for a more confident reader, and a highly manageable and exciting read for members of a younger audience. The ability of T.A. Barron to bring his world alive in so few words is incredibly impressive, as it allows for the reader to be absorbed in the places without losing track of what's happening in the story. He never dwells too long on any one part, but he always manages to say what he needs to. For further emphasis, as the beauty of Barron's writing cannot be stressed enough, I have selected a passage from the very beginning of the book to share with you. It was May, and in May even a dreary village before dawn could seem lovely. I pulled a burr from the sleeve of my tunic, listening to the quiet stirrings. This month excited me like no other. Flowers opened their faces to the sky, lambs birthed, leaves sprouted. And as the flowers blossomed, so did my dreams. Sometimes, in May, I swallowed my doubts and believed that one day I would find the truth. Who I really was, where I really came from. If not from Bronwen, then from someone else. See what I mean? You're already sucked in. The Lost Years of Merlin is unlike other children's fantasy novels I have read. Sure, you have your classic good versus evil fight, but that's not really what the book is about. It is the story of Amris's quest to discover his true home, and the level of personal depth is striking compared to most books targeted at the same audience. It forces the readers to reflect upon themselves in a new light, and that is what makes it a really special read. When we come back, I'll be discussing some of the major themes of the book. Again, if you want to read the book with no foreknowledge of any themes or messages, then it's probably best you return to this another time. However, if you're all for knowing what you could learn from reading The Lost Years of Merlin, by all means, continue listening. Despite being a book that's aimed at younger readers, The Lost Years of Merlin is by no means lacking thematically. It is a coming-of-age story in its essence, meant to teach people really of all ages that the place we belong, our home, is not necessarily where we are from. Amris spends all this time trying to find his birthplace, but eventually he realizes that coming to terms with his identity is more important than a physical sense of belonging. He learns that to be comfortable somewhere, one has to first become comfortable with themselves. Along similar lines, another message that can be taken from Barron's book is that our own power is determined by the love we have, not by how strong or big we are. Amris from the beginning always shows compassion towards people who are not necessarily good or kind, and yet this helps him succeed. This goes to show that love is more powerful than hate. Amris's friend Shim also proves that one's size and strength does not dictate one's potential. Even though Shim is not very big and strong like other giants, his care for others and his willingness to sacrifice a lot for the good of others is what allows him to do great things. Finally, I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode that Amris's connection to nature is extremely important in the book, and that is true. It is the trees that first inspire Amris to set out on his quest. It is the trees that protect him from harm, and this bond he has with the natural world is what ultimately leads him to his goal. It is clear that Barron is telling his readers not only that nature has much to offer, but there is part of nature inside ourselves, always, that we cannot ignore or take for granted. These are but a few of the themes to be found in Barron's writing. There are many more to discover, and of course every reader will have their own interpretation of the story. The Lost Years of Merlin is probably one of the best combinations of adventure fantasy and a growing up story out there. It is a great exploration of identity and self-love, something that not only its target audience, but everyone can appreciate. When the message is fully understood, readers not only get the tale of an epic quest, but a lot of insight into their own sense of self as well. It is in all respects a remarkable book, one that is worth reading no matter who you are. It is incredibly complementary to the Arthurian legend, and is a great example of excellent literature that by all means should be considered a classic of the fantasy genre. It fully deserves the 5-star rating that I award it. I am a full supporter of books that discuss personal topics written at a lower reading level. It is extremely important to teach kids to believe in themselves and to accept themselves for who they are, which is certainly the goal of the book. This concludes my analysis of The Lost Years of Merlin. It is available on Amazon in Kindle and ebook versions to enjoy in quarantine, and should be easily found on the shelves of your local bookstore and library. I hope you enjoy reading the book as much as I did. Thanks for listening to Quarantine Book Review. If you have any suggestions of books I can review, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Remember to stay safe, and as I say, live long and read good books.